say denial to tolerance, tolerance to acceptance, and from acceptance to celebration.
I think parents don't really understand what is autism. The world was thinking I was dumb.
Speech therapy works.
New neuro connections are being built every single day.
I expect miracles now.
So thank you for joining this podcast, Vaishnavi. I think parents today would want to hear your perspective as a parent and as a parent counselor, and also maybe a special educator because you work with a lot of children, a lot of special kids around maths and chemistry, right?
Math and science in general,
Math
yes,
and science in
absolutely.
general. Okay, good. So I will start this conversation wherein I would want you to share a bit about yourself, your family, your son Sid, with the parents.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me on this podcast. So I'm mom to a non-speaking teen. My son Sid is 16 now. He has Down syndrome. He's autistic. He doesn't speak. He communicates using alternative communication right now, and that's how I entered this journey. I also have a neurotypical daughter who is 13 years old, and so I've been a teacher for a while, for about 11 or 12 years. I used to teach neurotypical kids for the most time. I still teach chemistry and math to high schoolers and college students. But along the way, when I started, seeing how regular education wasn't serving my son, I was trying to see what do I need to do what do I need to change in order for my son to learn? Because here I am going out and teaching all of these kids and I'm not able to make a dent. Neither is the school able to make a dent, apparently. And that's how I came, I slowly over the years, little by little, I came up with the strategies that I now call nonlinear education, simply because, especially when children have neurodivergent learning abilities, learning doesn't happen in a straight line, and hence the nonlinear education. So I was forced to think out of the box, and that's where I am right now.
All right. So, Vaishnavi, you mentioned you have a daughter who's 13 and Sid is right
Mhm.
now 16, right? How is their bonding?
It's it's interesting, right? So a lot of bonding depends on communication. So they're kind of chill with each other. So they bond in more non-verbal areas where they both like similar music. So they both usually my daughter, my son likes the music that she puts on. It's either K-pop or Bollywood or whatever, and then they'll dance to that. She is right now slowly learning to communicate with him using the letterboard, but so their bonding is I would say very in the world of music and watching TV together.
Got it. But as a
Yeah.
parent, so a lot of parents who come to us do tell us that the child has a sibling. So is
Mhm.
there anything that one or two tips that you would have tried or you think over the years you can advise to a parent so that the sibling bond can be built up or can strengthen or that ice can break?
Yes, first of all, the parent has to treat the child with a disability by presuming competence 100% and 100% respect. If we are apologetic about about our child, now I'm talking about the child with the disability, if I'm apologetic about, say, if I am feeling like I have done a big disservice to my daughter because, she doesn't have a typical brother, if I am constantly on the what is the word for it? If I'm constantly kind of in this apologetic mode where I'm like, how can I make it better
Denial?
for my daughter? Yeah. So she's always going to, that bond is not going to be there. So right from the very beginning, in my case, it was like the expectation was very clear. There wasn't an expectation. The treatment was very clear that I always treated Sid the way I treat Maitri. I spoke to Sid like I speak to Maitri. I use the same language. I don't baby. I mean, he may not be able to talk back, but I can still use the same method of communication. And it was very clear that there is no, we don't look down or there is, or be embarrassed, especially. I mean, nobody looks down, but people are often embarrassed that there is no embarrassment, there is no, children, there's this saying that, what is it? Do as I do, not do as I say, or whatever that
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
is, right? Because a lot of times we think
Each,
saying
yeah.
these things makes a difference. You can say
I
anything
know.
to your child, but if you are behaving in this way where you're constantly, a lot of times this happens because we're very on tenterhooks, we're tiptoeing on eggshells, right? And if you can stand with your chest held high and you can start treating equally, you're already setting the example. So I think that is the biggest thing. There's nothing you can teach your child about it. You can model it.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Tell me one thing, Vaishnavi. When you say you work with parents and you would counsel them, normally I come across parents who tell me this part of their life, that they go to a doctor, they feel their child is slightly different from other children, or maybe the sibling, and then they get a diagnosis that your child may be on the spectrum. What happens at that moment? Do parents come to you and say, we feel weak, what have I done wrong? Mothers typically start victimizing themselves. What is your advice at exactly that point of time? What should they do at that moment, and what should they do in the initial 1 or 2 years?
I actually just recorded a reel yesterday about that. So on Instagram, and I was this week, that is my theme of that's something that I'm talking about. And I do have answers for that, but that's not what I usually counsel parents for. My counseling is very specific on how to get your child towards an age appropriate education and age appropriate communication. So mine is like really focused on like regulation, get your child regulated and started learning. So usually when I'm working with a parent, I can only work if they're already over this, right? Because if you're stuck in this mode of grief, then grief and progress, there is something called, what is it called? It's something called post-traumatic growth. But when you're in the middle of that grief, growth cannot, in my experience, growth cannot happen. So you have to finish that cycle, whatever it is. The number one thing is that this grief is, you have to think whether it's coming from you or whether it's coming from society's expectation of what kind of kid you were supposed to have. Your in-laws, your parents, your mother, your people around, we have set up this idea that, oh, you're supposed to have this really healthy, within quotes, baby, right? So first see whether it's your own grief. Okay. So if it's not your own grief, then maybe you want to detach from it.
Yeah.
And secondly, remember that everything that people know about autism is very incomplete. So whatever you are making up the story in your mind that my son is going to be like this, my daughter is going, you have no idea. You really don't have any idea. So if you can start with a fresh plate, you can see that there is a world of infinite possibility. And finally, I would say one of the biggest culprits here is support groups. Because if you're not in the right support group, which are very few, okay, you have to be very careful. Like for the longest time, I didn't even tell people because people would, I didn't share my son's disability. Of course, it was very obvious from his face, but I didn't talk about it because people would say they were sorry for me. People would feel like, oh, you have done such good things. Why are bad things happening? The minute you get into that space, right? That's it. You cannot progress. So you go from, denial to acceptance. We are stepping up on Autism Acceptance Month, right? Denial to acceptance. Actually, I would say denial to tolerance, tolerance to acceptance, and from acceptance to celebration. And your acceptance also will not lead you to anything because you can accept, okay, then what? So you have to be 100% like, lean into that disability, because every disability has some skill sets that other neurotypes don't. So yeah, so there is so the thing is that, do I have a complete advice on how to get out of that grief and thing? No, I mean, it takes time. If you have to allow yourself some time, you cannot like switch it off in a minute, but finish that time and then move on.
Got it. You touched on
Yeah.
one topic in between. You mentioned that I think parents don't really understand what is autism. When
Yeah.
I speak to parents here, they consider their child to be brain dumb.
Mm.
They feel that it is an IQ issue. Whereas, as much as I have read, it is coming out to be a low muscle tone, that, language is being developed in the brain, but they're not able to form it or voice it out because that connection is not happening. The muscles, or the jaw muscles, that's also not moving. So, what exactly is it? Do parents have to really believe that my child is now worthless?
I mean,
Have
definitely
like no
not.
IQ
Yeah.
and no brain?
So that's the IQ part is completely unsubstantiated, right? There is no data, no research. All the studies that test IQ are severely flawed. Even in neurotypical kids, the concept of IQ has been completely busted, that, requiring IQ test is complete nonsense for anybody, okay? But for somebody with sensory motor deficit, so that's the thing, is that autism is, we don't even know completely what it is. There's studies that say that it's a neurological issue, it's an immune system issue, but we know for sure that it is a sensory motor issue. That means sensory system is impacted, motor system is impacted. All communication is based on the motor system. Every communication, speech is oral motor. Vision, eye contact. If you can, some people can communicate through their eyes. We all communicate through our eyes. That is ocular motor. Okay. Gestures, sign language. These are, fine motor skills. Every communication is some sort of, actually not just motor, but fine motor skills. So when when motor skills are impacted, communication will be impacted, nothing to do with IQ. The area where motor is mapped on the brain is very different from where cognition happens in the brain. These are completely, the language and the, if tomorrow I'm not able to talk, will you suddenly think I have lost my intelligence? That makes no sense, right? We all know this. We know people who cannot talk, or who choose not to talk or who talk less. There's nothing to do. These are complete different, neurologically different areas of the brain. So there is no connection. So autism, and in fact, if anything, I would say that the most kids with autism I've seen, even the so-called, we don't use the word low functioning anymore, but I'm using it in case people are labeling their own kids. Even the kids who are not speaking, even the kids who are not moving, even the kids who are looking, dead to the world like that. So IQ is probably higher, not lower. Okay, higher than the parent, I would endeavor to say. So it's like we are trying to judge somebody whose IQ is higher than us. We're not going to be able to. So
I think this is one of the best takeaways that parents will have, and they should have rather. Is there one myth that you have come across when in your set of parents, when you talk to, a very, very strong myth that people have in their mind linked to autism or linked to speech that you would want to break? You would want
this
to tell
one,
them
that autism is an IQ disorder, or autism is it is pervasive, man. It's everywhere. People are constantly, oh, my son. I have seen, like here, there was this meeting where people were, I don't know, by mistake, I landed in that meeting. I didn't intend to be there, but I thought it was some other thing. People were looking at group homes for their kids, or they were looking for, these are for older kids. They were looking to see how to let their children live independently. And there's nothing wrong in that, but the tone of the meeting was not something I was very happy about. But some people had brought their kids with them. Now, these are younger kids. Now, imagine you are like non-speaking kids who are listening to their parents talk about how to have somebody else take care of them, right? So it's a very emotional thing. But the parents, obviously, they are genuinely saying, oh, my son doesn't understand anything. So people are having traumatic conversations in front of their kids because they think that their kids don't understand anything. This is the biggest disservice we're doing our kids. I have never, I've come across hundreds of kids. I've worked with so many kids. I work pretty much mostly with autistic non-speaking kids, and I work with kids with Down syndrome. I have never, ever come across a kid with receptive language issues. I've only come across expressive language. They are very different things. This is the biggest myth, that if you cannot express, then you cannot receive. It's complete nonsense. I don't know
with
how
that.
to make ourselves believe these things that, oh, because my child cannot speak, he cannot understand. What is the connection? I don't know.
There was one video that I was watching where the child had finally learned how to communicate in that stencil method, wherein the child, the first thing that the child told the parents and the therapist was, I am finally able to express what I feel. The world was thinking I was dumb. Just because I was not responding did not mean that I was not listening.
Yes.
And the parents asked that child this question, that how do you know so much? Because when the therapist kept on asking deep science questions, they said, how do you know so much? He said, I was able to listen, just that my body was not allowing me to talk.
Yeah.
That does not mean I was not understanding everything that you guys were discussing at home and the news and the paper, whatever. So that was a beautiful, that was an eye-opening.
It is wonderful. The letterboarding techniques are able to bring out these nuances in children's thoughts, right? So it's not that without the techniques, they are not thinking. They are anyway thinking. But these methods are able to give a means of expression. And I think if people could change one thing, right, whether you can learn these techniques or not, doesn't matter. At least speak to your child as though they can understand, and don't speak in front of your child about them. I mean, give them the basic courtesy, because this whole thing that we have going on in our mind, my child doesn't understand anything. People keep thinking, oh, other people's kids may be smart, my child is not smart. Give it a break. Like there is there's this kind of a seminal educator. Her name was Anne Donnell, and she just passed away this week, actually. She was the one that kind of like, she was one of the people who brought in this idea of presuming competence many decades ago when this was like in the dark ages of special education. We are still not over the dark ages, but so she has something called the least dangerous assumption. She said, what are the, it's okay, let's say your child is really not understanding anything. This is one assumption. Your child really doesn't understand. So what will happen if I teach them, advanced stuff? What is the worst that will happen? They'll not understand. I have wasted my time. That is the worst thing. But the opposite scenario is child is understanding everything. And what will happen if I don't teach them anything? That is cruelty. I'm treating them like, worse than an animal. So that point, somebody who's understanding, I'm locking them up in a cage, in a metaphorical intellectual cage. And I'm talking about them. So which is more dangerous? That you have a child who doesn't understand and you want to waste your time or you want to waste somebody's life, right?
Yeah.
So if you even if you don't believe anything we are saying, by just comparing the two worst case scenarios,
Yeah.
obviously the better assumption is it is in educational literature. It is actually called, parents can go and Google this, least dangerous assumption.
Okay.
So that's what, whenever you're teaching your child, if you're going to school, the least dangerous assumption is to assume your child is learning, right? So what is the worst that can happen is you would have wasted a little bit time. That's okay. What are we doing with that time anyway? So it's fine. Yeah.
Exactly on that. Last time when I spoke to you, you stressed so much, and it was the first time I could hear this from a parent, where the parent was stressing more on communication and less on speech. Speech is there, whether somebody chooses to speak, doesn't choose to speak, that's fine. Communication
Yes.
has to be there. And this, I think, is a huge gap right now that I see, at least in India, wherein every parent is trying to work very, very hard on speech. I think they're missing the most critical part, which is communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So communication, who said that it has to be only speech, right? Because we can keep waiting. This is the biggest waste of time I have seen. People spend so much time and energy, like you said, on speech therapy. I want everybody who's listening to this, if you have done speech therapy for more than 3 or 4 years, go back and see what you have gained. Has your child started communicating, fluently, or has anything changed? If at all something has changed, great, continue, okay? But for a majority of people, this change does not happen because you're looking at we're talking about fine motor control. The highest fine motor control is in your vocal cords, right? So, why some people can sing and some people cannot sing? It's because we are doing very fine oscillations and movements there. This is the most complex motor control in our body, more than the eyes, more than our hands, more than everything is the vocal cords. It is not something that I've seen speech therapy work magic for people who have speech and have lost it, like a stroke or something like that. But somehow in autism, I have not seen it work that well. Okay. So not that, you know, instead of speech therapy, if we call it communication therapy, that is a different thing. But if you focus only on speech, if you're somehow wanting your child to speech, what you will be left with is a child you have to constantly prompt, or you're getting very basic low quality speech, like, I want to go there, I want this, I want statements. If you're stuck there and you're not moving, it's time to change your communication method. Any communication method, 90% of the communication methods offered will take a child to, if at all they take them anywhere, they'll take it to, I want to eat, I want cookie, I want bread, I want music, I want to go out.
Yeah.
Saying let's go out is also I want only. Let's go to the library. That is also an I want statement. So what is not an I want statement? What you were sharing, right? People thought I was not smart, but see what I can do. Or I'm feeling really hot today. Can we turn on the fan? Or, or sharing like, what a beautiful day outside. Or I'm just tired of, something even like my son will say, I'm tired of you nagging me all the time. Anything, right? That is not a I want statement. Or saying that, suppose I have a fight with my mom, my son will say that, be nice to grandma or something like that. These are not I want statements. They're general sharing of ideas
Yeah.
about the world. That is communication. That is full communication. If your communication device is not leading there, if it has shown some promise, but you're stuck in I want. It's time to change.
Got it. So very interesting that now Sid is 16, you said.
Yeah.
In his early years, let's say up till 5, 6 years of age, and then let's say 6 to about 12, and then post his teens, how has your involvement or work with him evolved? So, what are some different things that you have tried in different age groups with him?
So what are the interventions I've tried?
Yes, what are the interventions?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I've tried everything. Okay. So, maybe I should like, when we were young, we did ABA, which is like the biggest regret of my life. But the thing is, but we did ABA for a bit, and Sid was actually one of the people who had the privilege of being rejected from ABA because he was too, within quotes, low functioning, which is probably a good thing. But we did ABA for a while, and that didn't really work at all. Then we tried regular speech therapy communication. We did like pictures, they have this system called PECS where you just pull out pictures from Velcro, and you, like, if you want a guitar, you pick out a guitar. If you want a, whatever, if you want a um, iPad, you pick out that picture and you give it. And he was trained to pick out a picture and give it. And that's very limited. So because, if that picture, what if I want to talk about something, the picture is not there, right? So they're very limited. It maximum takes you to I want situation a little bit, but then it stops. Then, so we tried a lot of this. We did years of speech therapy, communication therapy, where they were not even trying on speech because he was not speaking at all. He still doesn't speak at all. But they tried different communications method, none of which worked until at the age of 7, I went and met Soma Mukhopadhyay in Austin and started rapid prompting method, where, you use a letterboard like this. And he, again, there, it's not like he made a change directly, but the communication, I saw how Soma was speaking to Sid for the first time. I saw somebody speaking with a lot of respect. Like she was just talking like a normal 7-year-old. She said, okay, let's talk about a farm, what lives on a farm. And then she put out a stencil board and he spelled dog. And I was like, he's 7 and he has never spoken pointed. Say, my son knows what a dog is. Like till 7, I really did not think he knows what a dog is, or the dog. I have not heard anything from his mouth. No eye contact, no speech, no signs, nothing. It's like a black box, right? Like I can understand why parents think the child is intellectually delayed. I also thought that at some point I'd also given up and thought, okay, this child really doesn't understand anything. I used to say point to the red color. He couldn't even point. He couldn't isolate his index finger. You would say point to yellow. He couldn't turn, like, I would say, oh my God, this child is 6, 7. He doesn't know his colors. Just that the body is not moving. But rapid prompting method, right? And was able to isolate gross motor movement. So movement like this pointing, somehow she has a way of training where then the first session, almost everybody cries because you see that this child who you thought doesn't understand anything is now spelling to you what is looking like complex stuff, right? And that was the beginning. So I had seen that. It's not like as soon as I came back, everything like became magic. It took years of practice. So because that was the only thing I had seen that work.
Yeah.
And because she's very skilled, the minute he went to her, he was able to really like communicate, but I was not able to replicate it.
Yeah.
So I worked and I worked and I worked, and now he is. So I'm talking about this child, 6.5, 7. Nothing, like zero means zero communication. Like people nowadays come and tell me my son is not like Sid. He'll not be able to do. I tell you, you have no idea what Sid was like. You are thinking he's this genius kid. He was this kid where therapists would not work with him because they would see like he's too low functioning for us. So really, like his hands would not move, eye would not move, finger could not point, nothing. Like he would just sit like wood, and I would like, how can, like, nothing, no communication, which is obviously not true. I just didn't know how to interpret, but like nothing, no obvious communication. Now he tells me that like he uses this board and says, okay, today I'm feeling low energy. Can I have one B complex? So he writes a supplement protocol. He's saying today I want omega-3s and B complex and carnitine or whatever, because he's monitoring his energy. And he is also saying that, okay, I need some digestive enzymes, or this enzyme is not working for me. He is completely, his therapy and everything is managed by him. So he says that, okay, now I want to become more independent in my communication. Let's try this. Let's try this. he is fully communicating and managing his life. So he says what he wants to do, how he wants, he needs a break. I am not managing. I mean, I'm managing externally, but like the micromanaging part is him. The second thing that I did when he was 4.5, there was this time we had just gone to India at the time, and I remember there was this the changes and whatever, something, he was just, when we were in India for 3 weeks, for the entire 3 weeks, he was laughing like a crazy person. And I didn't know what it was. Later on, I found out through, because I was just sitting and Googling and stuff, and I found out that this happens with an yeast overgrowth, because one of the byproducts of yeast is like alcohol. So it's kind of yeast overgrowth. Sometimes it used to be called gut alcohol syndrome. So the child can even behave like an alcoholic. It's creating, the yeast is metabolizing carbs to create alcohol and alcohol-like products. So basically, giggly, laughing, and it's not a fun laughter. It's like you cannot stop laughing. You know how when somebody laughs, it feels good, but if an alcoholic is always laughing, it doesn't. You know something is wrong, right?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of laughter, and he would not eat anything. I would have to distract him all the time. At that time, he was eating only paratha and all home cooked, but only gluten and dairy, wheat and dairy, homemade yogurt, home cooked chapati, everything. But and I thought I was doing a very good job giving home cooked stuff. But I was at my wits' end. He was not sleeping, just laughing. You cannot teach when a child is so uncomfortable. So you cannot, the RPM, nothing will work at that level. When the child is just completely miserable because the body is inflamed, you cannot start doing these things. So this is at 4.5. And I started looking up, and then this is fully just internet research, just based on what some parents were saying. We went gluten, as soon as I came back to US, went gluten and dairy free. And then slowly we moved to we moved to a diet called the GAPS diet, which we are not in anymore. But overall, we maintained a gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free diet. It took 6 months to a year, but that has been probably the primary change we made for him that allowed him to be there, because now he's able to know that he himself doesn't want gluten, dairy, or sugar. So I would say that these are the two things that work. Nothing else worked. Like I can very happily say, like occupational therapy worked. It was helpful, but the growth process, right? The what do you call it? The curve of growth curve
Learning
was the
curve.
highest in RPM and diet.
Got
So
it.
our occupational therapy is good, physical therapy is good, because these are things. Speech therapy worked for his oral motor skills. So his speech therapy, most therapists used to work on his feeding skills, where how to chew, that kind of thing it worked, not for speech at all, like zero.
And I just want to tell parents, because you mentioned this to me last time, that he's doing such high level maths and science now, which I think you only teach. So he is at par with his grade.
He's at par with his grade. He's in 11th grade right now. He's doing statistics. And when he was younger, he was very much a math kid. I remember when he was 9, he had learned how to convert decimal to binary, binary to decimal, but he lost interest in math eventually. So two things I want to say is that now my son has Down syndrome also, remember, which is actually classified as an intellectual disability. Okay, but now I'm meeting more and more kids with Down syndrome or using letterboards, and they are saying that they are really doing amazing things. I don't think Down syndrome is as much as an intellectual disability as we think. I think it's also a primarily sensory motor issue that we have not understood. So it is like we are missing the motor component of it. So like, and Down syndrome results in low muscle tone. Like the whole idea of Down syndrome, like, low muscle tone is one of the primary effects of Down syndrome. So when that happens, so you have to really see whether it's an intellectual disability or whether we're missing something else. But having said that, yeah, he was, but then when algebra and everything came, he is a very literature-based kid. So he likes writing poetry. So one day he suddenly just like does not want to do algebra. That's why we're doing statistics, because statistics is more story-based. It is more it's context based, right? So many people went this market research, 25% success, this failure. So they have some context. But with algebra, which I like non-context math a lot, but algebra is like you're solving a quadratic equation. Yes, you can make a context, but there's no immediate context. So he was like, no, I don't want to do it. So we struggled a lot with algebra last year.
Data
Not because it's
interpretation
not
is what he
smart.
likes.
Yeah. So there is there is motivation and there is intelligence, and sometimes you have to be careful whether which one we are judging, because when your child, this is another thing I've noticed, that if a child is neurodivergent, they tend to have very sharp interests. So like unlike us neurotypical people who can be mediocre in multiple things, neurodivergent kids are excellent in one thing and have no interest in another thing. So that you have to navigate that a little bit carefully, but that is far away. First you have to develop communication and start teaching. So a lot of people ask me, how can I have my child learn math like your son? Teach them math. How many people are teaching? You're not, we are expecting some miracle to happen inside. It's not going to happen unless we teach. Teaching without expectation of result, teaching without expectation of an answer, teaching without your expecting your child to reply to you. This is the number one technique to go ahead.
Vaishnavi, a lot of parents here who I've spoken to, I think the feedback they get from maybe teachers or the society or maybe like-minded parents is send your child to some special school. Now, I'll define that, to some special school, and eventually bring him home to homeschooling. There doesn't seem to be any future. This is normally what I hear. I think after having a conversation with you is when I opened up to the idea of children doing excellent level maths. Then I started following up. I started researching on YouTube. I started following those children, and I can see remarkable work that children are doing in the area of math, especially. So, when I say special schools is where these kids go to, these are not special education schools. So not really meant for you to bridge the gap in education. Very few of schools are doing that. Mostly these special schools look very gloomy.
They glorified daycare, basically.
No, not even glorified. It is a daycare meant for children who are not accepted by any other educational institution, and maybe run as an NGO, maybe run on CSR funds. Basically a place where
CSR?
parent can leave. It's you get some donation from corporates. It's a corporate social responsibility money. Yeah. So it's a place where children will be safe. Parents can leave them and have a breather. So the idea there is just leave them. We'll maybe show them colors, show them numbers, or let them be. At least you can have some spare time to either work or go to work or take rest. So this, I think, has been an eye-opener for me, the story that you told me about Sid. And then the number of children I saw doing exactly similar to what he's doing. Especially after I started, the moment I put speech and communication apart is when I started following up on this. So far, I think a lot of parents maybe used to think like me, because this is what I have heard from them, that speech and communication was in the same bucket. So all your life, the initial 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you work very, very hard on speech and you forget the whole aspect of the child learning. So that learning aspect is gone. Everybody is trying to make the child say hello, bye, mama, papa, food. And so many years go by and you're believing that my child is not learning because he doesn't get it. He's dumb. So firstly, I think maybe the takeaway that parents will have today, I really, really hope they have it, is they start putting these two in different buckets. While speech can go on, I really need to communicate with my child so that my child's intelligence is growing, the learning is growing, give him the exposure and the environment so that there's enough that he learns every day and it builds plasticity. I don't know how many parents would get that, but new neuro connections are being built every single day when a child steps out, sees new things, and you have a conversation with the child like you have with any other child, so-called neurotypical child or a normal child. So tell me here, when I had a word with you earlier, you told me about 3 specific pillars that you look at, which you feel are very important for any parent to keep in mind when it comes to autism or any such concern. What are those?
So I have a few comments on what you said, but I'll come back to that later. Let's talk about the 3 pillars now. So the 3 pillars are gut health. You can put nutrition in that pillar, but like I'm going to combine it as a gut health pillar because inflammation in the gut leads to neuroinflammation. So that is the first thing. So making sure that through diet and through, just through appropriate medical care if needed, the gut is taken care of. The second pillar is appropriate education and communication. Okay, so that is, let's put communication before education, up together actually, put appropriate education, communication, respect, treating the child as their age appropriate, how you would treat without, no matter what they present as. Okay, because without that, you cannot go anywhere. You can, people go behind this medical model a lot, right? Including therapy. You can do therapy after therapy after therapy, and you can give the best food and remove all the inflammation, right? But if you are not teaching the child, if you're not talking to the child in the age appropriate way, growth will not happen, right? So it's like, if I give you the best food, the most nourishing growth, okay, but I sing ABCD songs whenever I see you. First of all, you will not like to see my face. You will not have any motivation, and then I complain that, oh, my child doesn't learn. I can suppose that, I have seen people who are 20s, their children are 20s, and the mothers are still mothers, fathers, caregivers. Not why should we target the mothers? No, everybody, all the caregivers are, they are, they are reading these children's books to them, like 5-year, 6-year-old books. John goes to the farm. In the farm, he has 3 eggs, and there is a dog in the farm. These are 20. I have seen there are many 20-year, just because they cannot speak. What motivation will you have if you are in that position? Think about it. If somebody is talking to you like that, what motivation will you have?
Yeah.
You don't want to, even if you can speak, you will stop speaking, because what is the point of speaking when people are talking to you like that? So that is the second pillar, appropriate education and communication and treatment. The third pillar is broadly neuroplasticity. Appropriate education itself builds neuroplasticity, but I use that as a third pillar because there are other techniques like movement therapies that directly. So this lady, Anat Baniel, who started this thing called neuromovement, I really like one of her quotes. She said, movement is a language of the brain. And when Sid was young, there was a lot of these neurodevelopmental movement therapies around for children with Down syndrome. And they used to say swim or do cross patterns. They used to make the children crawl. And I have noticed benefits from that. Now, of course, the problem with these therapies is that they kept doing this movement and diet, but they never came to equal education and the thing. So that is the pillar that's neglected the most. I would say that if at all, the therapy that people are doing the most is this movement-based therapy. Somehow people, but it's not just OT or PT is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about intelligent movement, cross patterns, especially swimming, moving.
Working on both sides. Yeah.
Working on both sides and reflex integration. And, there are many, many methods. There's one thing called neuromovement, there's reflex integration, there's cross, all of these neurodevelopmental techniques, some brain gym, all of these things. Somehow parents sometimes, like I would say, maybe around 10% of the parents get there, right? And then there is diet. I would say maybe 3% of the parents get there. So whereas because it is a harder thing to change, to remove inflammatory foods. But still, there are still some magical stories about this child became like that. He started speaking this, that. So some 3% of the parents get there. And then there's equal education and communication. Not even 1% of the parents do that. Because that requires a huge leap of faith, because you have to first trust your child. And you have to agree that everything you knew so far, you thought you knew was wrong. You have to really completely put your ego away and realize that you had no idea what was going on. Let's get started from scratch. So that requires the biggest leap of faith. But these are the 3 pillars of.
Excellent. Yeah.
They're the only 3 pillars, actually. Everything else falls under this.
They have to carry on with all the 3 at the same time.
Yes. And you have to keep working on all the 3. You cannot, if you let go of diet, what will happen is that, and gut health, what will happen is that when inflammation becomes high, then it is like you having a raging fever, and I come and teach you calculus. Even if you're smart, you cannot sit and do calculus with me, because even if you're wanting to understand, how will you do it if your whole body is miserable and you're in pain or discomfort? You cannot do that. So you have to keep working on gut health and diet. There's no end, there's no expiry date to that. So that is just a baseline to be comfortable. Movement therapy, I would say, is that you do as and when needed. You do it, and then if you feel like you're done, you just keep coming back to it. It doesn't have to be all the time.
And
You
there are
do it,
many,
take
many
a
ways
break.
of doing it. I mean, we do share on our Instagram and YouTube channels, and I do
Mhm.
it every single day. And I really hope
Wonderful.
that parents just try to copy something. I mean, even once a day, if they do something with the child, that will help. So
Yes.
we do try to push parents to do that. And I hope
Yes.
they do.
Yes,
You
because it brings
said there were a few
flexibility to the
points.
brain.
Yeah, exactly. You said there were a few points you wanted to make regarding that initial thing that I shared with you about communication and speech and how parents are uh, they end up sending their children to a so-called special school daycare kind of a
Special
setup,
school.
and where the child really doesn't learn as per his or her age, but is there safe. And then, typically what I hear is some children there look visually different to the child, and the child at times feels awkward or scared that why is the other child in a wheelchair or something. And then he stops going. And then eventually the child is always at home. Either he's homeschooled, but the parents believe that the child is dumb. So he's not really homeschooled as per his age, but he's just taught a few things, in the hope that one day he will learn a lot. And time passes by, and then he's an adult with maybe learning of probably a 4 5 year old, because he's not exposed to a lot. So because nobody really knows that he's actually learning, he's actually intelligent, he's listening to everything, and everybody's just waiting for him to speak one day. So
There's so many levels to this, right? There's so many, like the very bottom level is like is where you have no, you have completely like kind of given up on your child and you're just okay, some sort of like I said, glorified daycare, you're saying not even glorified, you're just sending somewhere and coming back. So this is a recipe for misery because you are in your mind, you're always thinking not only will your child not have the optimal environment for growth, but in your mind your entire life is restricted because you're not able to see your child like you are like because you need because it's a burden in your mind, right? So because you're treating her also like a burden, but there is unfortunately there is only one way to go through this journey and be happy, not only be happy but be enriched, right? So um, and that is to first understand that this whole IQ thing is a myth. Okay. So there is, once you understand that your child is as intelligent or more intelligent than you, then you will stop being grateful to any Tom, Dick, and Harry taking care of your child, right? So because it's a privilege, it's like in
yeah,
fact, I will not leave my child there because I know that okay, he's capable of so much. I will not just leave him anywhere to vegetate, right? I'm very careful, like even 1 or 2 hours when I'm leaving. Of course, I understand that like a lot of this has to do with economic status. There's a whole elitist angle to this because if you are working two jobs or both parents are working and the finances are needed, what can you do? You cannot. If out of desperation you're doing that, or if out of need, that is a very different scenario. Okay, I'm not talking about that. Like you may need economically that support, and that is totally fine. But if you're doing it because you think this is all your child can handle, that is a completely different situation. If
yeah,
you can, so it any peace of mind to a parent can only come when you realize what your child is capable of. Then, because then you start fighting for your child, right? So when you're fighting for something, you'll not go into depression. So fighting for something is the opposite of the state of mind of depression.
hmm.
It's better to feel wronged and fight for something than to feel that oh, why has this happened to me? I would rather be in a state where,
Yeah,
I need to teach my child. You're not teaching
yeah.
this
Be in
properly. Let me
control.
find somebody
Yeah,
else. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah. Tell me
yeah,
one
so I
thing,
would, yeah,
Vaishnavi,
go
one
ahead.
thing, because in your eyes there's gleam. Basically, it's so proud of where Sid is today. Tell me one thing that you celebrate about him, or in this journey that he has made, you've been amazed. One thing you
Yes.
did share at the age of 4.5 when he said DOG dog.
Mm.
But in the last couple of years as a teenager, what has surprised you? And then I would also touch upon one last thing, which is puberty.
Mm. What has surprised me is I think I'm actually I'm no longer on one hand I'm surprised every day. On the other hand, I expect miracles now, so I'm not surprised by anything. Like parents come and tell me, "Oh, do you know my son wrote this?" And I'm like, "Of course he wrote it." Like in a way, I'm really not surprised, but I'm very grateful to be given this insight into his life and into all my students' life, into every autistic student or child that I worked with, because I see that like enormous resilience. Okay. So these kids are like, I will not be able to survive one day in their shoes, not because they are struggling or suffering, not because of that, but because of how much they're underestimated. So imagine that, like, constantly being put down all the time. Like, we get so upset if somebody puts us down, even one thing, like somebody underestimates us little bit. You're like, how dare you talk like that about me? Like being in this situation where people are constantly talking about you in front of you and still maintaining some level of dignity, and you just get used to this life. So I'm amazed by that resilience. And when you allow that diamond to shine, right, the output that comes out, right, like Sid wanted to host a poetry club for his fellow non-speakers. So every full moon day, every month, we have something called a full moon Rotary Club, which is all these spellers come together and they write poetry. I have always found that their level of poetry, right? Like they just sit and write, and it's at a very different level from if I were to bring neurotypical people of that age. It is it's very neurotypical, it's very common. Like I include myself, it's very predictable. But here, this poetry is very, all the language, everything is very unpredictable. It's like we are getting a very rare glimpse into a different way of thinking, into a very different way of being, right? Are there challenges with that? Of course there are challenges, because you have to make sure, I mean, like, Sid is not independent. I cannot just leave him at home and go. I have to make sure he has care. I have to make sure that, future things are taken care of. It's not like there are things that are challenging that I have to take care of. But along with that, it's really a glimpse into some sort of a magical world that I think that, we are very fortunate to see. In our house, if there are any, like, he works on a very high level of intuition. That is one thing I'm always amazed at. Like, if we are ever struggling to make a decision, we'll ask him, what do you think we should do? He has a very, very clear decision making. There is no ambiguities. Like, I think you guys should do this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. Oh, I think this has been a lot of takeaways, a lot of myth breaker conversation. I'm sure parents will have a lot to go back and maybe fix, maybe start from the beginning. And the biggest thing I wish that they do is they start putting speech and communication separately. They start believing that my child understands, listens, and he gets it. And speech is something which is not connected to learning. It is, he gets it, he knows. So please, work with him as per his age. I think that is very, very important. Tell me
Yes.
the other thing, which is a common fear that parents have when the child is close to his age of puberty, as to how do we communicate to the child, or how do we prepare the child for certain body changes. Any advice that you would give parents here?
Puberty can be a hard time. I would say that I'm not an expert on that, because I feel like in the world of Down syndrome, it's experienced a little bit differently. But what I would say, how do you communicate? You communicate normally. If you baby it and if you make it like, if you treat them like a child, this is why it's very important to develop communication before. You don't wait until puberty to develop communication. You start the communication before, so that you can have conversation, so you can start talking normally. You just talk normally how you would talk to somebody else. Now, yes, so many kids have issues with impulse control. Okay, many kids, they don't have control over their body, so these are going to be challenging things for some people. Some kids actually, like, puberty can go both ways. I've seen that some people struggle more, but a lot of kids I've seen actually settle down more.
Okay.
I think one of the key things um, is to balance blood sugar. So make sure that your child's diet is very stable before you're hitting puberty. Very stable, very clean, very anti-inflammatory.
Okay.
And at the same time, you build communication.
That's,
So
yeah.
that
I
at
think
least you give them
communication
the best
becomes the
chance.
key here. Because if
Yeah.
he's able to tell you exactly what he's feeling, it's, 90% of the problem solved.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I think this has been very, very useful for me, Vaishnavi. Very, very useful. I'm sure parents will have a lot to take away from another parent who has been able to somehow crack this, not be a victim, has come out, her son has come out as a winner. And I think you mentioned to me last time that Sid won some poetry award as well, which is very tough.
He was published in a magazine called the Poetry Magazine. It's from, I actually have it right here. It's from the Poetry Foundation, which is one of the hardest probably magazines to get published in the US. Yeah, it's not a kids poetry magazine or anything like that. It
Yeah,
is like what
for everybody.
it's just a poetry magazine. He did. And to round off with, if people are thinking, like I keep saying, communication, how to communicate, I would say that whether your child is minimally speaking or non-speaking, try one of the letterboarding related communication methods and keep trying until you get the hang of it. It's not magic, it won't work overnight, but it does work. It pretty much works for everybody. So there's RPM, there's S2C, there's Speller's method. One of them, hopefully should work.
I think we will do another round of discussion around this technique. I'm
Yeah.
also having a conversation with Somaji on 3rd. I will try to
Wonderful,
agree
wonderful, yes.
for her to agree to do maybe a 30-minute session. If she can just give a flavor of what it is all about, I hope she agrees to do that. And then maybe introduce the parents in India to that. Maybe some of the parents already know, but I did not know. And ever since you
It is
told me,
not very well known. It's
I
it's
have been
it's it's
researching a
only
lot on.
starting now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been very,
Unfortunately,
very good.
like the things that work, there is things that work are neither covered by insurance nor are they known. There is a saying in a smaller autism community that I'm part of where it says that if it's covered by insurance, it's probably not going to work for my child. And that's pretty much my experience. Yeah, is that yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Vaishnavi. Thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
we shall connect again, maybe in part 2, wherein I really would want to see your communication methodology in practice, if you can show that. And I hope
Yeah,
parents
we can do that. We can,
try.
yeah.
Yeah. The Ayurved plans to introduce that in some form, but um, I I feel speech therapy or OT or any kind of movement exercise, nutrition, along with building communication is very, very important. Otherwise, children will remain aggressive because they're not able to share what they feel. And it's
Yeah.
very limiting if they just say, I want, I want, I want. So I think this should be useful. And maybe the next time we can go deeper into the speech, the communication technology bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So much.